hostages were released through diplomatic negotiations that were mediated by Qatar and Egypt, which means that this is not a measure of last resort, that there are diplomatic means that are available to achieve this. Hamas has also said that it'll release all of the hostages in exchange for all Palestinian prisoners. Finally add that on this point, we should remember when you mentioned the hospitals, that Israel has used the talking points, that the hospitals are used as weapons depots or as military headquarters, as you said. I urge all journalists to exercise an incredible amount of skepticism. Israel said this in 2006 in its incursion in Lebanon, and Human Rights Watch found that that was not verified. Israel said this again in 2004. We have to be skeptical in this moment. We cannot take what military officials are telling us. They will not admit to war crimes. They have to be prosecuted for war crimes. They have to be tried for war crimes.
Yes, and that is a question I want to ask you, actually. And it's important here because you're right to raise the issue of proportionality and whether this is a proportionate response. We know, for example, China's foreign minister says this has gone beyond the bounds of self-defense. But also Israel stakes its claim. It says that it is entitled to do this. It has been bombing Gaza since the 7th of October because Hamas killed 1,400 people and kidnapped more than 200 hostages. They say this is their claim to self-defense. You disagree?
It's not just I disagree. Legal scholars disagree. Human rights advocates disagree. It is not up to states to define what the bounds of self-defense are. There is a tremendous amount of jurisprudence that has defined this. There is a tremendous amount of literature that has debated this. States are bound by international law. And in this case, the very minimum is that they are bound by proportionality and distinction between civilians and combatants, which Israel is telling us they're not doing. They have told us that they are imposing a complete siege, denying electricity, fuel, water, food. They have admitted that they're engaging in collective punishment. They have expressed genocidal intent where there are no Palestinian civilians, according to them. There should be no negotiation on this. I want to highlight that this is not a new trope. But colonial powers have done this historically. In 1935, when fascist Italy, led by Mussolini, invaded Ethiopia, they said the same things about Ethiopians hiding in hospitals. They said the same thing, the Red Cross said the same things about Ethiopians, that they were too barbaric.
So I just want to ask you this, because given the work that you do, that if war crimes have been committed by either side here, that the evidence is gathered and then prosecutions can follow, because we know often these sorts of war crimes only come to light after they have been committed.
That's an excellent question. And that's actually the primary obstacle, because Israel has prevented human rights defenders from entering. They have prevented the entrance of the UN's special rapporteurs on the occupied Palestinian territories from even completing their reports. They have now said that they are calling for everybody to boycott the United Nations because they passed on Friday a General Assembly resolution calling for a humanitarian pause. They are actually impeding investigation. They have called for a boycott of the International Criminal Court and refused to accede to it, in contrast to Palestine, which did accede to it in 2015. And even Hamas agreed to that accession and agreed to be tried. So if there is difficulty in collecting this evidence, it is because a state that has been determined to be a rogue state, Israel, by the human rights international community, we have to understand that we can't even perform the bounds of a rule-based order, rules of engagement, to see whether or not they were followed, because Israel is impeding an investigation. They have shown that they are unwilling and unable to investigate themselves. They are showing that they are not respecting international law, and it is imperative upon an international community to apply the red lines that the United States said it would not impose upon Israel.
Nora, it's good to have you with us tonight. Thank you. That's Nora Erakat joining us live from the United States, Associate Professor at Rutgers University. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News.
Now showing on BBC Real.
How does communal thinking affect our individual brains? If you and I were working together and we both had our brains hooked up to an EEG machine so that we were analysing electrical activity within our brains, if we were working together well, then actually our brainwaves would start to synchronise, they'd start to become in step with each other. And that degree of brain synchronicity can actually be used to predict how well a group is working together. If we look that our brain health relies on this to protect us against longer-term illnesses of the brain like dementia or Alzheimer's.
Original global stories from the BBC.
You're watching BBC News. Now, here in the UK, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has chaired an emergency COBRA meeting to discuss the situation in Israel and Gaza and the impact on communities in the UK. Senior ministers, police chief and security officials, well, they met to assess the threat posed by what they referred to as domestic terrorism. For now, the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre has decided to maintain the threat level of international terror at substantial. Home Secretary Suella Braverman spoke after that meeting and described London's pro-Palestinian protests as hate marches.
We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people, the single largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches.
The view there of Suella Braverman. Well, let's speak now to Alexander Melagru-Hitchens. He's a lecturer in terrorism and radicalisation and at the War Studies Department of King's College in London. Thank you for being with us. And there's a lot to unpick there, and it really does underline, doesn't it, just the far-reaching consequences of that conflict in the Middle East. Talk to me first of all about the difficulty around policing some of this, because we know more than ever this is a war that is being fought on the ground, but also online, particularly in the realms of social media. Just explain the difficulty of policing that.
Well, I think policing it on the ground is incredibly difficult. Unfortunately, the marches that the Home Secretary referred to, I think unfairly as hate marches as a whole, I think many people attending those marches perhaps would have had more legitimate pro-Palestinian positions, but I would urge people to look at the organizers of these marches, many of whom have long-standing connections to Hamas and records of support and otherwise praise for Hamas. So I would urge anyone who attends those marches to take quite seriously and look at who was and make sure they're not part of that